some places it's close to breaking point. Thank you. The war in Ukraine has caused skyrocketing energy and commodity prices with knock-on effects on key inputs into our farming system. Those have squeezed margins and make some activities unprofitable. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted our supply chains and changed demand patterns, leading to empty shelves. At the same time, the impacts of climate change and growing increasingly obvious. The UK's climate is growing hotter, wetter in areas, and wetter overall. These propose additional challenges for farms in terms of equality of production of their crops and the health and welfare of their livestock. Agriculture and land use change is not only driving climate impacts, but is also causing a dramatic decline in wildlife across the world, putting hundreds of species at risk of extinction. This impacts our ability to produce food for the long term. The combination of short-term shocks, long-term structural threats is putting the resilience and reliance of our food system into question. Already, we are seeing dramatic impacts on household food security. The compound impacts of the cost of living crisis, rise in energy costs, inflation, climate impacts, and the increased costs of farming inputs are driving up food prices, pushing greater numbers of people into food poverty. The cause of much of these problems can be attributed to agricultural policies, which have sidelined nature, the climate, public health in favour of production at all costs kind of mindset. Next slide, please. The pressures facing farmers highlights the urgent needs for transformational action across our food and farming system. And now is the time to make that really happen. While the fragilities of our system have been exposed in harsh light, we also have a massive opportunity to deliver a tangible, long-lasting change, and farmers need to be at the heart of that. Now is a window for setting the tone of the future food and agriculture across the UK towards policies that truly recognise the varied work that farmers do as land stewards and ensure they are properly incentivised and rewarded for this work. Next slide, please. While farming has a vital role to play in feeding the nation, we have to recognise that general food security will be achieved by balancing domestic and imported production. And we need to focus on how do we get that balance right. Concentration too much on production here will make us vulnerable in the UK if, by extreme weather, we do not have the diversity within a global system. We could find ourselves, as our climate breaks down, not able to feed ourselves when we need to rely on some imports to do that. And there will be other opportunities for us to export our surplus to feed other people. So instead of viewing the relationship between farming and food security through the lens of self-sufficiency alone, we do need to take a broader view in what that looks like. Increase the reliance on UK agriculture and food systems and support is vital to contribution towards a healthy and sustainable diet, overall human well-being, and a thriving natural environment. Other factors as global trends, international trade, food waste, supply chain resilience, education, skills, and economic circumstances at household levels will all have an impact. All play critical roles in whether people have the significant nourishing food to eat on a consistent basis. A narrow focus on increasing domestic food production at all costs will not make us food secure. Next slide, please. We believe nature-friendly farming is a mindset that informs farms' business decisions making and on-farm practices. So really putting nature at the heart of our farming and our businesses. It is an approach to farming which sees nature as a valued partner rather than an optional add-on or something you just fit around the outside of fields. In recognition that nature is a part of and centre to a long-term food production, nature-friendly farming means reducing inputs like pesticides and fertilizers, reducing tillage where possible to improve soil quality, and creating habitats which benefit nature and aim farm business outcomes, such as flower-rich boundaries and margins, and also focus around biodiversity in the centre of fields. It means explicitly using parts of the farms to fulfil vital roles other than food production, where it's most appropriate and beneficial to do so, attending a balance of land use for food, nature and climate across our farm landscape. Nature-friendly farming is regenerative, circular, low waste, agri-ecological, low input, resilient, and locally contextual and diverse. Nature-friendly farming is practical and economically viable, and we see many farms across the UK and even globally that are demonstrating how this can work. And the evidence shows that it has an ability to deliver food needs on a large scale as part of a more sustainable farming and food system. Next slide, please. It is now becoming clear that farming with and for nature is key to increasing the long-term resilience of agricultural production and therefore our food security. We need to be looking at protecting soil through resilient tillage and cover cropping, the opportunities of agroforestry and silvopasture, increasing natural fertility in our soils and in our cropping systems and in our grasses, looking at nitrogen fixing legumes, better rotations, better crop residual management, and integrating livestock into our cropping systems and recognising the benefit livestock can give in fertilising our soil and delivering biodiversity benefits in a well-managed farm system, as well as increasing managing habitat for wildlife throughout the farm. They can all play an important role. Together, these kinds of measures have multiple resilience benefits and alternative income streams also. Next slide, please. Thank you. So on our own farm, I farm in Cambridgeshire, and I recognise and have been working away at working with nature across our farm landscape, where we deliver better habitats and have them interconnected across our farm. We can reduce inputs. We no longer need insecticides. Focusing on soil health and building up natural processes has cutting my fertiliser cost by well over half, moving away from fossil fuel and non-renewable fertiliser sources. But also by keeping my arable soils covered with cover crops, we can reduce nutrient loss through the soil and water, but also vertically and into the air, and greatly reducing our energy use by looking at direct drilling and reducing tillaging operations, but also the amount of machinery and horsepower that is now needed. So on our own farm, we've cut our fuel use by over 70%, our herbicide use by over 80%, our fungicide use is around 60% less, and we're seeing great opportunities in delivering a better economic model and being more resilient and reducing inputs. And in some places, this actually means increasing yields, but in having a wider, diverse rotation, some yields have reduced, but the margin and the profitability and the resilience of our farming system has become better. Next slide, please. Healthy food for healthy people. There is also evidence that food produced using agroecological methods can be healthier for us. And I'm involved, and I know many others are in a number of trials to see and identify the nutritional value and the benefits of those systems. For example, organically grown crops contain higher levels of antioxidants and 4 times lower levels of pesticide residue. Grass-fed beef and milk are highly beneficial in ratios of omega-6, omega-3 fatty acids compared to other production systems. A side-by-side study of the US regenerative farms alongside conventional counterparts found food with more beneficial nutrients, lower levels of detrimental elements, including sodium and nickel. Supporting nature-friendly diets has the potential to not only tackle much of our burden of diet-related ill health, but also support some of the changes to farming and land use that are critically needed for our future. By reducing our dependence on unhealthy, ultra-processed convenience foods, we can reduce the demand for bulky commodities that have driven our large-scale monoculture production system globally at the expense of our environment. Climate adaptation and mitigation. Nature-friendly farming activities promotes emissions reductions by harnessing natural fertility and natural processes rather than relying on high footprint external inputs. We know it's more profitable by buying in less inputs and getting the balance of our landscapes right. It reduces the need of that fossil fuel and intensive and fossil fuel-based fertilizers, minimizes the use of machinery, and reduces tillage requirements and pesticide applications across our farms. By aligning levels of livestock production with their function as an ecological system and integrated livestock into arable rotations, reducing the reliance on cereal and soil-based animal feeds to help feed them from a more natural process. Nature-friendly farming can slash livestock emissions by focusing on more natural diets. Biodiversity recovery. With the right mindset, approach, responsible land management can produce food while also creating space for a diverse range of plants and animals that will thrive in our landscapes. Evidence has shown that making this transition does not need to come at the expense of productivity. In fact, nature-friendly farming is essential to promotion of long-term resilience within our food system. The presence of areas of nature alongside cropped land can provide habitats for predators, and natural levels of crop pests are kept low. Reducing pesticide expenditure and crop losses. For example, in one study, installation of wild buffer zones strips across the farm landscape had seen increase in yields by up to 18%. And I've seen that evidence myself on our own farm and on other farms we've been working with. This is partly to do with the increased predatory levels and biodiversity levels within a farm landscape. And we have seen on our own farm that having good habitats in close proximity to crops, we've seen less bean and weevil, I'll get the words out, damage within our crops, making our food production healthier and better, and also the opportunity of less inputs. Next slide, please. Farming is not just about production. Delivering what's best in the right landscape, these can be multifunctional outputs, and our farm landscape needs to be seen as a multifunctional opportunity of delivery and not just looking through the single lens of food production. High efficiency, working with nature to deliver sustainable output in some areas, a greater focus on high ambition environmental gains alongside low output farm production in others, but looking for rewards for public goods in those areas. In others, climate and biodiversity outcomes will be the primary goal. We need to focus on the best outcomes for our landscape and for our businesses and keep rural economy going and farming at the heart of delivering for the future. How does this happen? We need a good land use strategy in order to deliver this and make the best decisions about our land, both the farm scale and the wider landscape. And we call on government to hopefully deliver that land use strategy soon. Next slide, please. Many farmers want to deliver more for nature alongside those that already are. There are several barriers standing in their way. Perceived tensions between profits and environmental delivery. We often hear that you can't be in the black or you can't be in the green if you're in the red. I would say that if you don't farm in the green, you will be in the red. In the long term, we have to farm with nature across our landscape. Perceived tensions, the lack of support and system training, peer pressure that those farmers that are doing things slightly differently and having their landscape look different are not as productive and are not playing the vital role farmers should in feeding the world. We also need to recognise that those farms are feeding people, but we're also delivering for environmental outputs. High upfront investment sometimes in making change happen at speed, and also many short-term focuses. Next slide, please. Oh, I've jumped ahead. We're missing a slide, but never mind. Believe that. Can we just go back a slide if you can? So, farming and land use is an important part of the picture, but we must recognise that a truly joined-up food strategy is needed to support working across government departments, sectors, and economy. This joined-up approach is critical in determining the role of agriculture, land in meeting net zero and nature targets, and how our diet and farming needs to change hand in hand to achieve sustainable health goals. We need trade policy to work well. We need food policy to work well. Supply chains and markets also need to be fair and responsible and give a fair return. And we also need to work with people. Next slide, please, the infographic one. Ooh. Do we have the infographic slide, please? Your back one.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get that up. Give me 1 second.
Well, there is an infographic that hopefully will pop up in a minute, and you'll see that in our Rethink Food report. And we're clearly trying to lay out the opportunities if we focus around that whole farm approach and delivering different things in different places in a really joined up way. It's obviously not going to come up. So our reference, you go and look on our website, to our Rethink Food report, and we can really see how we can have a joined up system. Oh, there she comes. There it comes. We can get that on that's it. Brilliant. So you can clearly see that we're trying to use infographics to clearly see those opportunities of that circular farming system, bringing nutrition and nutrients within the scheme, reducing food waste, recognising trading abroad at high environmental and animal welfare standards that give joined up approaches, connecting food with our consumers and where it comes from so they can understand their purchasing power, having a farming system that protects and enhances our farmed landscape and the biodiversity within it, focusing on areas where there are greater opportunities to deliver high outputs, biodiversity and other opportunities alongside farming. Next slide, please. No, back one. There should be slide 13 somewhere in my deck doors. So I'll go on, and our main asks, despite having laid out a food strategy in 2012, there is not enough link up between England's food strategy and the environmental land management scheme, the ELM. Neither ELM nor food strategy go far enough, and we called for a food bill that seeks to bring together England's food and agricultural sectors to promote a nature-friendly food system, aligned with the country's net zero and biodiversity goals. A transformation away from the CAP style payments towards public money and public goods via the environmental land management is critical in unlocking a transformation to come in resilient farming sectors. The three scheme structure must be maintained, with the scheme to address widespread environmental objectives other than delivering and others to deliver spatial targeted environmental land management, and the third tier to do that landscape resilience at scale, and that big opportunity of getting farming and nature working at scale, delivering high output opportunities for biodiversity. And the funding must reflect the challenges of the need. We need a land use framework to mitigate the trade-offs and maximise the co-benefits for agriculture and conservation. Currently, England has no process of priority and weighing up the competing pressures on our land. DEFRA needs to develop a land use framework for England based on the 3-compartment model and guide decision making and ensure that food production and land use help us meet our country's climate and biodiversity goals. In England, there is currently specific government investments into, in England, there isn't any current specific government investment into knowledge sharing. We ask government to follow the Scottish model and facilitate knowledge exchange into support the transition to nature-friendly food systems. We see government put funding into advisors, but not help facilitate that farmer-to-farmer knowledge sharing that will really accelerate the transition we need to see. We can only expect so much change to come from individuals' behaviour shifts and changing retailer sourcing patterns. Government intervention and legislation is required to drive sustainable dietary change. We call on the government to support the transition to a low-impact sustainable diets across the country. I don't know if that slide 14 was available of the styling. If that's possible to pop up, I can explain that one again while it's there. Thank you. So I see farmers as lots of farmers as a styling. There are amazing farmers right across the UK doing great things, and a styling represents them. Shine a light on them and they look beautiful. They can be noisy, disruptive, and they may look a little bit messy sometimes within their landscape. But individually, they don't make an impact. But when we see stylings come together and make a murmuration and people sit up and take notice, they watch and stare, and collectively they have an impact. And that is why the nature-friendly farming was created, and together we are having that impact. And we are starting to see policymakers and governments across the UK really wanting to engage and talk to the network. And it's the opportunity for farmers to reach out and have their voices being heard through policy making, through sharing information, but also engaging with politicians. And we'll hear some more of that shortly. And it's together we can do this and make things really work. And if you're keen to be a case study or be involved in more, please do contact us, and there's an opportunity to chat and see how we can do that. And together we can really make that difference and make a opportunity of delivering a better farm system. So I think that was all for me. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the questions later.
Thank you very much for that, Martin. That's fantastic, especially the styling thing. Yeah, beautiful. Can I please hand over now to Vicki Hird? And if you keep the questions coming into the question answer box, and we'll try and get through them all at the end. We should have about 20-25 minutes at the end, so we should get through quite a few. So I'll just keep them coming in and we'll collate them and ask them at the end. Vicki, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James, and please shout if I'm going too long. I guess there's some very good questions there, and I will think of them as I'm speaking and go on a tangent. So just shout if I need to stop. But yeah, so I'm Vicki Hird. I'm head of farming at Sustain. Very quickly, what that is, it's an alliance of 110 non-governmental organisations, research institutes, farming organisations, including NFFN, all the organic bodies, and Land Workers Alliance, which somebody has mentioned. So all of them have a complete or some interest in the food and farming system. We're there to change policy and practice together, because we see, as Martin was saying, together we can possibly make a difference. Individually, it's hard, and we'll plough our own silos. We see that a lot in government. They're very siloed, working departments not working together enough and the outcomes aren't right. We know we need to be thinking of these things from a system basis, a whole system, what matters to farmers, what matters to consumers, what matters to health, what matters to all connected. So all our members are interested in all of it in a way, but they'll be focusing on particular areas. And I focus on farming and supply chain. And what's been really brilliant, I have to say, over the last few years since NFFN was created, is that it's providing a really positive and progressive farming voice, recognizing that there's huge issues, acknowledging those huge issues, but also the duality of producing food and protecting the environment and nature are totally possible. And what's brilliant is we've been able to talk over the last few years about margins rather than yields. I've been working on farming for 30 years and farming policy, and it's really been hard to talk about that without people just saying that's ridiculous, you can't do anything that's going to reduce your yields. It's so important to recognize that we can farm sustainably, and I think NFFN have made a really great case producing food, the amount of food we need, which is relevant to the discussion Martin started about food security, not necessarily what we're sold in the marketplace. I'll talk about that in a bit later, but we've seen the impact of Nature Friendly Farmers Network, and we fully support their engagement on farm policy and wider work. And as we talk with MPs and peers in the House of Parliament right now, and as much as we can get any cut through the mess that is politics right now, but that intervention is vital, and it's vital because so for many years we haven't had a really strong shall I say, conventional farming voice saying what's needed and acknowledging all the trade-offs. And we have an election manifesto starting to be developed. There's nothing more important to be engaging with MPs and with parties over the next year as they develop their manifestos. So that work that we're touching on is critical at a local constituency level. So this report, just to say, and its predecessor, is really valuable because it looks at the whole system, which has been broken for some time and gets more broken year by year at the moment. And the food sector and the farm sector has not really been willing to acknowledge this. So it's great this report does. So I support it for many reasons, as it's got great proposals, particularly for all nations. That's often forgotten. The way the NFFN has membership work in all 4 nations is really great, really important, because we've got to listen to each other and acknowledge the differences, both in policy and practice, cultures, etc., and really embrace that, not try to be Westminster focused or uniform. And ELMS as a focus, critical. It could not be more important. Funding the transitions, funding collaborations, funding landscape scale, as well as individual farmer action, wherever farmers are on the ladder of involvement in regenerative agroecological systems. Unfortunately, the recent hype about ELMS has not been helpful. It's been putting environment versus profits and food security. It's been saying ELMS is dead, ELMS isn't good enough, and that's all sort of putting farmers off. It's giving mixed messages to the taxpayer who pays for ELMS. Really, none of these things are true. It's really important that we have ELMS, and Martin's been a great advocate. We've been having to work on it for 4.5 years. It's painful, but we need to make sure it works for all farmers. It's key, and NFFN and other farmers should be a critical friend. And as one farmer in your report puts, if you're farming in balance, you'll be at your most profitable and nature will benefit. That's key, saying farmers being able to say that we're willing to change and embrace ELMS and protecting nature and tackling climate. So somebody's mentioned the land use framework, as the report does absolutely correctly. It's, again, never been more critical because we've, as Martin said, we've got so many demands on our land, and if all the range from energy crops to golf courses to development. And we've also got an awful lot of crops growing that you could argue aren't actually essential for our nutritional security. Crops for junk food that isn't particularly good for us, crops for feeding cars or for feeding intensive livestock systems. So we need a land use framework that looks at it as a whole. And from what I understand, actually, in a meeting today, that it is still on track. It was one of the outcomes of the National Food Strategy. Many of the other outcomes seem to be lost, but I understand that DEFRA still have plans to launch something next year, a sort of vision, and they're doing scenarios work. So that's exciting and important. As Martin said, we're the country that doesn't have one, and we really need it. So we need farmers engaging with that and making clear what they can do with their land to deliver on the multiple outcomes that we need, the multiple aspirations. And diversity is key. As the report said, diversity in farming, on the farm, and in food. Also, what we're eating has got too monotonous, very narrow range of things, even though it looks like a huge range in the supermarket. It's quite narrow, the amount of things we're relying on, the amount of crops and the uniformity. So we need to maintain the mosaic of farms, but also ensure farms can diversify, particularly to deliver the kind of nature-based outcomes for farming, for the farming bottom line. If you create a greater rotation, you're going to break pest cycles. You're going to bring in more fertility, particularly low leguminous crops, which store carbon and which fix nitrogen in the soil, and bringing livestock into the farm, bringing back mixed farming, critical. That's part of the diversity. And farm trees, like agroforestry, having trees within crops or within livestock systems, multiple benefits you can see from that. And that's what the government has plans to support. And we need to keep on at them to maintain those plans. And we've seen agro-environment schemes fail in the past through things like lack of advice and support and farmer-led support for each other. That's absolutely critical, alongside adequate ambition in those schemes to get the farmers going up the ladder and enforcement of regulations. We can't forget those things. And clearly the report talks about trade policy. We've got a really big fail at the moment in trade policy, and we need to really demand of our government that they allow a proper examination of new trade deals, such as with New Zealand, India, other regions. All of us agree on that. I've never been in such an unholy alliance of organizations demanding better trade policy, so we protect the good that we can do here, whilst showing leadership globally on core standards in farming, but not undermining what the good farmers are doing here by importing lower standard produce. But as Martin said, it's not just about farm payments and policy and trade. These are critical, but it's also about supply chains and the market opportunities for change. Our new report out, we got a new report out on Friday called Unpicking Food Prices, and it shows unbelievably starkly how farmers have been getting less and less, in some cases almost nothing, much less than a penny profits on 5 everyday products. We do carrots, bread, burgers, apples and carrots. They get so little, and we show that, but we had a professor looking at the supply chain in detail. This can't continue. It's not about having a higher shelf price, it's about where the costs are extracted in a very long, complex supply chain. Profits are extracted all the way that chain, and that needs attention. And we need better routes to market for farmers. As the nature-friendly farmers say, we need supply chain to reward good practice, but we need the government to ensure that they deal fairly with producers. They won't do it otherwise. They're on a knife edge themselves. The whole thing is a bit broken, as our report shows, and our report draws on data from before March. It's got even worse, as any farmer will know. But it was bad before. They were getting tiny percentages of the profits. But it's also great to see in the NFFN report, absolutely critical, the wider changes such as on diets. The evidence is absolutely clear. The land use and emissions and the harm to nature from too much consumption has to change. And too much waste. A lot of the land that's farmed is wasted. 30% of the food we actually farm is actually wasted in the supply chain or at the domestic end in our houses. And livestock products, we've got to tackle livestock, and ultra processed foods, the junk foods that we actually don't need. We don't need to produce them. That's a waste of land. That land could be producing much better products, and it could be producing possibly nature or carbon storage. That all needs to change. So we need to facilitate the collaboration to drive dietary change and make the transformation, so farmers and workers have a just transition, doing something different if they can, so that less and better meat, for instance, is one outcome, and good livestock is another, is one of the outcomes from that, well managed livestock, and that farmers are properly rewarded for producing good meat. And labelling, critical that consumers are able to choose wisely. And we must absolutely avoid the greenwashing that is rampant. And I've written many blogs about this, rampant in the food industry. And it's really got to stop, and we're all part of a big labelling campaign. And so finally, the large spend by government on food. There's a very billions spent for schools, hospitals, the armed forces, care homes. The government must be leading by example, as NFFN say. Procurement, public procurement of food, and we're working on that at the moment with a new system of dynamic food procurement. It's not getting the government support it deserves and should have, and it makes so much sense. That dynamic procurement allows small scale producers, local producers, diverse producers, farmers with maybe a small pallet of carrots to get into what are often huge procurement contracts. The dynamic system allows that, enabling producers getting into their produce into that. So it's not all full of very low cost products from overseas, junk food, etc. So that is critical to support farmers in being climate and nature friendly. And it's also going to be healthier produce. That kind of procurement system and menus that fit, absolutely critical. So there's loads in this report, absolutely spot on. And it's often in my past that I haven't seen such a range of produce, such a range of issues coming up in farmer reports. Really, really important. And we applaud you for doing that. And we applaud you for the work you're doing in engaging MPs, because that's absolutely critical. They understand all these things. Most MPs don't. They really don't. So farmers at a local level talking to their MP about that, and the wider community, absolutely spot on and critical as we engage them in the advance of the next election. So I'll finish there. I hope that was a useful contribution.
Thank you very much, Vicky, and thank you for all the work that you do for sustaining, sort of collating all these endless amount of bodies together, and doing a great job. And the reports that are coming out are doing great work as well, really reaching the right spots. I'm now going to hand over to two people, Mary and Lisa. So Mary is the NFFN's MP Farmer Engagement, and then Lisa Guy is a member who is going to talk about experience of work with NFFN to engage with her MP. So I'll hand over to you both now. Thank you very much. Keep the questions coming as well, by the way.
Thanks, James. And yeah, do keep the questions coming. Yeah, hi. So I don't need to introduce myself because James has done that for me. Thank you. So I'll just get straight into it. So Lottie, could I have the next slide, I think? Yes. So the big question, why is MP engagement important right now? So the agricultural sector, as we all know, is currently being reviewed by the government. It seems to be ambiguous as to when we're going to be getting that review, but it's coming. So in theory, decision makers should pay attention to and act on the issues that that matter to the country most. This means we have a part to play in elevating farming issues to the forefront of the conversation. So like I say, in theory, our local MPs should pay attention to the issues that their constituents are talking about. So engaging with our MPs supports them in scrutinising the government and can therefore lead to shaping and changing of policy and the policy agenda. Farm visits, which is how the NFFN are trying to engage with MPs the most, these can give MPs a fresh perspective on the issues facing farmers, because they are diverse across the country. So it's great to have this local representation and the issues facing farmers in various parts of the country. And the farm visits also enable farmers to stay informed about their MP's political agenda. So on top of that, meeting with our MPs on site can help us to gain new experiences and connections within the network. So that's within the NFFN, but also as within the network of farmers across the country as a whole. And it also raises the profile of the NFFN when it's done under our banner and its members. So many farmers who have hosted MP visits in the past now have an ongoing relationship with those MPs. So this seems like an appropriate time to introduce Lisa Guy. So she hosted her MP down in Cornwall last month, and she's here to share a bit about her experience. So I'll pass over to you, please, Lisa. And if we could get rid of the slide for a minute, please, Lottie, so we can see Lisa. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. So yes, my name's Lisa Guy, and I'm a farmer down in West Cornwall. It's a small farm, organic beef and wildlife. And the fact that I am farming with wildlife is one of my main selling points. I sell all my beef locally and to a local deli restaurant in Mousehole as well. My farming system is totally intrinsic with nature, you know, and all of my customers really appreciate that. And I think that's becoming more and more important to people. So that's really great. I'd like to thank being part of the NFFN, because it's so nice feeling like I'm part of a larger community of farmers that are also trying to, you know, are perhaps already farming with nature or redesigning their system to incorporate space for nature and wildlife. And I think it's really important that as farmers, we're able to demonstrate this to our MPs. I think many MPs go to the NFU, which is great, but perhaps we're not so well represented within the NFU. And so when NFFN approached and sent out that email saying, would any farmer host their local MP? Yes, I was a bit nervous, unsure, but I thought, no, I'm going to do this because I'd really like to share what I do with my MP, you know, with our MP, our local MP. And I was quite aware that probably he didn't really have much understanding of farming in the first place. And secondly, farming with nature. So although I was unsure, I was given a lot of confidence by Mary, because she sent me through some great little fact sheets that basically gave me some guidelines on some of the things that I might like to share or emphasize with how I farm. And also a representative from the NFFN supplied me with the latest info on what was happening in politics today with regards to farming. And that was really useful for me as well. I'm not particularly political or up to date with those sorts of things. And I felt it was important that I had a little bit of understanding under my belt so that, you know, I could make the best of the visit. And so that was really helpful. Also, I had somebody from the NFFN join me on the visit, which was also quite nice, because I thought, well, if there are any difficult questions, I can just pass them over to him. So that was super. And I think the other thing I had to remind myself is, well, what is the role of our MPs? You know, well, they are there to listen. They are there to engage with their community and find out what's happening on the ground, you know, in all the different sectors. And the farming one is a very, very important one, especially with climate crisis and the demise of wildlife. You know, it's so important for our MPs to come out to our farms and see what we do and what is going on in farming and in producing food today. So yes, I sort of built my confidence up, and our MP came out, and it was great. We had a really positive visit. It was really rewarding to walk out with my MP to the fields, show my cows that were just finished grazing a herbal ley, and just bring to his attention the fact that in a herbal ley, you've got great herbs like bird's foot trefoil and plantain that reduce gas production in ruminants, which then means that they're burping less methane. Well, you know, how many MPs get an opportunity to see that and appreciate that fact? You know, if you're farming with nature, if you're incorporating herbal leys, you know, we're not having to introduce seaweed to reduce, you know, methane production. I think he really enjoyed sort of seeing that. He was able to look over some of the woodlands and the wet meadows that my cows graze. And I was able to explain to him that there's a lot of ivy in those woods, and my cows make an absolute beeline grazing all of that ivy, which I actually use as a way of reducing the parasite load in my cows. So I don't worm my cows. I haven't wormed them for over 25 years. And, you know, and I know that that is a very important aspect to keeping that worm load in control and keeping my cows healthy. And I think my MP really enjoyed understanding about that, you know, because when we're farming with nature, we can reduce a lot of those chemical inputs that are mainstream, you know, but they don't have to be. And this is just one way of farming with nature. You know, I'm a sort of organic beef farmer, but there's organic, you know, arable and sheep farmers that are also, you know, doing a lot for nature as well. And the diversity is huge, and we're all adding something, and we're all, you know, bringing in environmental benefits. And so it was really wonderful to share what I was doing with my MP, and I found it rewarding, and I think he left feeling really quite inspired, and that felt good too. And a bit better educated about how diverse farming can be and how diverse the systems of farming can be as well. And it was also really nice to just share with him some of the local issues, some of the issues pertinent to me as a farmer in West Cornwall, you know, along the coast it's on the north coast between St Ives and Land's End. So it's a very particular landscape. And it's important, I think, for our MPs to really engage and recognise that around the whole of the British Isles, it's very diverse, you know, and it lends itself to different types of farming and engaging with nature in very different ways. And so I think it's really important that we enable our MPs to come out and see that. And it wasn't nearly as scary as I thought, but it was a heck of a lot rewarding for me, and I think for him too. So my bottom line is more of us should do it. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. That was great. I'm still jealous that I wasn't there on the farm visit, but it sounds like it was fantastic. Right, Lottie, could we please have the PowerPoint back? And should be the next slide, please. Yes. So everyone's got an idea of what MP engagement is, but obviously we have to tailor it to an NFFN context. So obviously MP engagement is interacting with your MP to discuss issues of the moment, as well as the NFFN's policy top lines and the nature friendly work you do on your farm. So that's the sort of structure that these farm visits take. It's generally a bit about the NFFN's policy and our views, which Martin has obviously explained fantastically. And then a lot of it is just about our farmers showing the fantastic work they're doing. And like Lisa said, I think MPs sometimes are surprised at how fascinating some of it is, as am I. So yeah, so MP engagement can take various formats. You've got letter writing, booking a slot at a constituency surgery, an online meeting, or a farm visit. And farm visits, like I say, are the main way we're trying to engage with MPs. We are looking at other options as well, but the farm visits, that they are our main priority, because sensory experience, I think, creates a lasting memory in the MP's mind and the farmer and myself. So yeah, I don't think you can quite beat that. So yeah, that's why we're doing that. And next slide, please, Lottie. Oh, there you go. Here are some pictures of our MP engagement so far. So you've got Lisa in the bottom right there, actually, with her MP. So yeah, this is just a few from what we've been doing over the past couple of months. Yeah, so hopefully some of you can be on some of these pictures one day. Next one, please. Okay, so since I joined the NFFN in August, our MP engagement has taken shape. Over the past couple of months, we've begun to put these farm visits that I am talking about in motion. I've also created an advocacy pack for MP engagement, as well as briefing templates for each MP and party. So as Lisa mentioned, if there are any farmers out there that I'm speaking to now, if you're interested in MP engagement, then we do provide you with all the tools that you need to engage with your MP. So we have some farmers that are really confident in politics, and they've done it all before, or they have an existing relationship with their MP, or we have other farmers who are just really keen to get involved and are interested in how they can help and how they can make a difference. So we do provide support at every step of the way. We have like a pre-visit meeting with you, all the way up to an NFFN representative being there on the day. So yeah, so far it has been me approaching farmers like I approached Lisa from our member base, asking if they'd like to host their MP. I have been really pleased with the response I've had. Most farmers have got such a can-do attitude and really keen to get involved, which is really lovely. And we have a target of engaging with 100 MPs in 1 year on site. And we are currently at, it says 12 there, but it's actually 13 now. So yeah, we're currently there. Like I say, it's been me approaching farmers, but going forward, I mean, I'll still be doing that. But it would be really helpful to have a bank of farmers come forward to me with their desire to host their MP as well. So we can sort of work in tandem like that. And can I have the next slide, please? I think this is the last one. Yes. So if you are keen to get involved, I will just say, I know we have some members of the public who aren't farmers on the webinar tonight. And so obviously I'm not talking directly to you about the MP engagement, but if you would like to join the NFFN, please do, because yeah, that would just be fantastic. But anyway, as far as the farm visits go, if you would like to get involved with that on your farm, I think my email was sent round by my colleague Katie before the webinar. I can drop it in the chat box again. But yeah, please do email me with your desire to host your MP. We have a hit list of about 100 MPs. And so if your MP is on the hit list, then fantastic. And if not, please, I mean, you don't know the hit list, but just message me and we'll sort something out for sure. And then just a note on the type of farmers we are looking for. So we're looking for farmers who are taking active steps to farm in harmony with nature and can demonstrate the real world value of this to MPs. So far in my experience, I have found no farmer has a problem doing that. They're all fantastic. Second one is up for continued engagement with their MP. So we obviously have an initial meeting with the MP on the farm, but we really are looking for farmers who are keen to carry on the engagement afterwards. So a lot of MPs, most MPs have a quarterly or biannual rural get together. It's a good forum for both MP and farmer to stay mutually updated. So it's things like this that we'd like you to be keen to sort of get involved with, carry on checking in with your MP, see if they've followed up, see if they've followed through on stuff they said they do. So yeah, basically people with a real passion for politics, or if not a passion for politics, an interest in politics. So, and then above all, obviously, we need people who are passionate about what they do and about changing the direction of agriculture for the better. So I think it goes without saying that Lisa's passion for what she does shone through, and that's the sort of people we need, because MPs remember it, and yeah, it makes for a fantastic experience. So if this sounds like something you'd like to do, like I say, please do email me. I think you have my email already, but I will drop it in the chat. But that is it from me. So I will hand back to James for the Q&A. We've had a lot of questions, so I would probably actually just note here that we probably will not get through all these questions. However, follow us on Instagram. We're collecting all of the unanswered questions for a Q&A in the future on Instagram. So your questions will get answered at some point. But yeah, I will hand back to James now so we can get through as many as possible.
Right, thank you very much, Marianne. Thank you, Lisa, as well. It was great to hear how engaged the MP was, and yeah, going forward, it's something that we all can get involved with, and show them the passion that there is on British farms. Right, can I please, right, we'll just crack on with the questions because I think we've got half an hour, so we'll get through as many as we can. Like Mary said, we might not get through them all. So I'll fire on straight away. How do we overcome greenwashing funded by well-resourced and vested interests? And if I could throw that to Martin and Vicki, please.
I think some of it would be calling it out for what it is. But what we really need is a framework from government to put that rules and regulations within it, because at the moment it is free to do what they want, and we are seeing lots of greenwash going on, and that needs calling out and demonstrating for what it is. But we do need the right framework from government.
I would agree with Martin. Ideally, really strong labelling regulations that embrace the production methodology and how the animals have been treated, how the land has been treated. It's a difficult one. I don't think we could expect consumers to make all the choices that will deliver what we need. So you know, we do need proper regulation and labelling, so they at least, it's honest labeling. It should be honest labeling. That's absolute bare minimum. But yeah, I agree with Martin that we should be calling it out. And I think farmers should be calling it out as well, and not and being very clear on what they believe is the right way, the right direction of travel. You know, it's really difficult. I would say that the organic label is legally, you know, enforced. It's got a very strong third-party accreditation scheme. That's the one people go to, and pasture-fed livestock, because they're both, there's a value there that people see in the shops, and it has worked. It's become too much of a marketing tool, though, particularly organic and elite and expensive and all those kind of things. But organic farming is fabulous. But you know, there's a tricky thing to do here, but government has got to step in. It's got to be government being clear on what's allowable and what's not.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we, so just sort of leading on from that then, to what extent do you agree that food supply chains are too long and complicated? To Vicki?
Well,
please.
I'm just finishing my report that's coming out on Friday on this. It's called Unpicking Food Prices. And we've got a professor to look at where all the costs go in the food chain for 5 items. It's cheddar, bread, burgers, carrots and apples. That's all we could look at. But she's an expert on accountancy, and she looked at all the data that she could. It's really shocking. And it is that complexity. It's the just-in-time systems. It's the centralized distribution systems that have been invested in over the last 20, 30 years by the retailers. And we've been saying this for a long time. I published a report called Off Our Trolleys in the 90s. It's the supermarket systems that now we can see the results of that, in that farmers are getting so little. They can't get the reward they need to go green, to be in the black, to be in the black, to go green, so to speak. It's great. I totally support the question. They have got too complex. So one of our answers is that we want investment, government investment, like levelling up funds, shared prosperity fund money, to actually invest, and local enterprise partnerships in local and regional supply chains and new routes to market. So there's infrastructure there for farmers to process produce or collate it and market it together at a more local and regional level, and get more of the value. So when people are spending that money, or when the public is spending its money on publicly procured food, that farmers get a good wedge of that money, because right now, in many cases, they're not.
Thanks very much, Vicki. Can I ask Martin then, just leading on again from that, how do we support members of the public to help find nature-friendly farming, food and fibre products?
We need, well, labelling, buying direct from source wherever possible. There are a number of websites out there where you can buy direct from farms. If you can go to farmers markets and other things. And if you're shopping in supermarkets, look out for where the farmer's face and name is attached to a product, because then it's clearly connected to that farmer who's producing it in hopefully a trusted supply chain for a supermarket contract. I think it's going to get better. If you find we'll have Nature Friendly Farming Network's going to have a new website in a couple of weeks' time, and that will have a section around an improved section around how do people find local good source food. So hopefully that can really build on that.
Thank you very much, Martin. Lisa, could you maybe just, someone's asked, how do Lisa's beef prices compare to supermarket prices?
Well, I think extremely reasonably. So I charge a box of beef, which will have a mixed range of meat cuts throughout it at £12 a kilo, soon to be going up to £13 a kilo. And I think that's really reasonable. And I think I can keep it reasonable because I have so few inputs. So, you know, the way I farm and farming with nature definitely helps keeping my inputs low. So yeah, it is more expensive, but what I find with my customers, and they're all local families, and we're not in exactly, apart from all the second homeowners, a wealthy area, if you like. They're just normal working families, and they are affording it. And I think it's because it's becoming a bit more of a priority for people to feel that they know where their meat is coming from. And perhaps people are prepared to eat a little bit less meat, but make sure that the meat that they're eating is better. So yeah, that's how I do it. And you know, my beef flies off. I put my email out to my customers, and by a couple of days later, that whole animal is sold. Yeah. So, and I think as more education happens and more support for farmers to farm in the correct way, you know, I could potentially put my beef prices up and get a slightly better market. But for right now, I'm happy with what I get. It gives me enough of a margin to make a successful business.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. It's great that the local people are supporting, you know, someone and a way of farming that that they deem to be the right way of producing food and looking after the environment and creating habitats. So you're ticking a lot of boxes for everyone. Question for Martin. Sorry, it's just gone off. Does NFFN have an opinion on food sovereignty as an approach?
Yeah, I think food sovereignty is really important. And it's about connecting food as much to local people and local systems, and the value of the food that they produce stays within the community and within the farmers or the growers' pocket as much as possible. So yeah, we talk of food security, but sovereignty is really important. And as we hopefully change our food system and reprioritize locally sourced wherever possible, and connect with more community growing opportunities and veg boxes and bits, there's a real opportunity to get the true value to food to the farmer and delivering healthy food to people.
Have you got something you want to add to that, Vicki?
Oh, I think Martin put it very clearly, but that's I think we've got a lot of brilliant direct sales and great traders, but there's still a tiny percentage of the market. Majority is from Tesco, Aldi, and now increasingly Amazon. So we need and we are working with many to actually build a much larger market share for those alternative trading systems, either direct or through Better Food. Better Food Traders Network is growing massively, although it's hard times right now because of the cost of living crisis. So these schemes are finding it difficult, but they have been growing, recognizing, as Lisa said, people are recognizing they want to know who's grown their food, and they can do it through a trusted trader like the Better Food Traders Network or a community supported agriculture, equally brilliant initiatives, and they've been growing too. It's been really encouraging. So all the things, but we need them to get much bigger and challenge the market share, which is a huge hurdle to climb.
How confident can we be that the land use framework the government is due to issue, maybe, will move us close to the ecologically based food system Martin describes? Do you want to have a go, Martin?
I think they'll put something out because there's a lot of pressure on them, but I do think it would be probably a weak affair and really not have the strength within it. But at least it will give us something to focus on and sort of focus that where the investment is the right and the wrong place for that land use change, that crops that grow, that energy crops. But if we don't have anything, we haven't got anything to hang anything to. So if we have something, we can try and make it better as well. So I'm hopeful, but we've seen previous actions from government, this government and previous, that always haven't delivered what we really need to make the change happen that we want within society. So I'm hopeful it'll be there, but I'm never hopeful it's going to be as strong as we need.
There is, at the meeting I went to, it was suggested they are going to release a vision and principles next year. But as Martin said, we've seen a lot of these things before, but we've got to create the noise and the movement to demand that actually delivers something really useful. Because actually, it could not be more critical that we get our land use right. Climate change is going to kick in, already is, in terms of land not being able to be used here or overseas for food production. We've got to use it wisely. I mean, there's also the issue of having more local and regional involvement in deciding what the land is used for, sort of on a democratic basis, which creates a whole load of problems, but also create really good answers.
Thank you very much, both. Question for Mary. How does the group plan to, well, actually the whole group, but Mary, answer first. How does the group plan to tackle structural political issues such as powerful corporations who have the means to influence media, politicians and public?
What a question. So I saw this question when it came up, actually, and the first thing that sprung to mind was Martin's analogy of the starling. And I actually thought that was just a fantastic way of putting it, because, you know, with any sort of political issue, there is strength in numbers. Like I was at the Good Food, Good Farming March that the Land Workers Alliance did back in October, I think it was. And there's just a real strength of feeling amongst people, and people do really care. And I think it just takes, I mean, this is obviously from my MP engagement side of thing, it really takes people speaking up for something they believe in to create that noise. And I think that's why the network is so fantastic in doing that. The other thing that sprang to mind on sort of weaving our way through big corporations and things is that we do partner with organizations that sort of align more with our values. Like we did, this is not my remit, but we did a partnership with Neal's Yard Remedies over Black Friday. So they're a fairly big corporation. However, they align more with our values, and they sort of, they did a whole publicity thing. Sorry, I don't work in comms, but those are the two things that sprung to mind when I saw that question come up. I don't know if Martin or Vicky have anything to add.
I would add that the network is working with a wide range of organisations and farmers and others, publicly forward-facing, but there's a lot goes on behind the scenes. And we're getting increasingly approached by those big supply chains and other organisations that sometimes when you look at them, you think you wouldn't want to be engaged with them because of what their actions are doing. There have been opportunities to go and sit and discuss things and hopefully leave us some positive things in the direction. They realise, many of the supply chains, their footprint of for carbon and biodiversity is negative, and they need to make it positive, and they've got to deliver some of the change. And as a network, we can be influential in helping that change happen, hopefully for the better for farmers and our environment.
I would just add, being part of the movement is important, because these corporations, I mean, I suppose I'm thinking particularly of the chemical companies. I mean, we would probably need chemicals in the future, but we certainly need to be using less, and they won't like that. They obviously are going to be advocating against any weakening of strengthening of rules around use of chemicals, nitrogen fertilizers and pesticides and those kind of things. So the only thing that will counter that is movement and people, and writing to MP, visiting MP and saying that, you know, we should be having strong rules to protect the nature on which we depend for our food supply. So you know, movements are absolutely critical, and engaging with progressive corporations who are willing to actually change their business model. I think if they just do sort of shout about regenerative but don't change how they treat farmers, and how they peddle very high sugary, fatty, salty products to young people, all those kind of things, then they're being a really disingenuous, and we should be careful about engaging with them.
Speaking of engaging with suppliers and things, how do we bring profitable agri input suppliers on board with the movement? And that's an open question to you all. We all spend a huge amount of money with agri suppliers, and how do we get them on board when they're going to be selling us less?
I think they see the writing on the wall, a lot of them, and we've been invited to Hutchinson's Regenerative Farming Conference. I think it was last week. There are movements happening, and they are having to adjust their business model. While they may be doing it as slow as possible, they see the writing on the wall. And the more we can engage with them and demonstrate how they can quickly help farmers, and their model of supplying inputs will adjust to supplying more supporting advice and a different sort of input. And a lot of it's going to be about knowledge transfer. So there is a space in the market for them, but it'll be hopefully a lot less of the damaging products that some of them do want to market more of.
Yeah, I would agree with Martin. There's a lot that they could sell in terms of knowledge and advice, monitoring pest numbers and things like that, and forecasting where the pests are going to be a problem much better, and using very targeted chemicals, and then selling the whole package, integrated pest management, those kind of things. So it is the way forward. And that should be supported by the government as well, through the support things, so helping farmers from both sides.
Lisa, how have you found the sort of engagement with your suppliers if you haven't wormed cows for however many years? The fact that you're not spending money, I presume reps don't really bother coming up your lane.
No, I don't get any hassle at all. It's blissful. But I also think, I take the opportunity, and I would encourage every farmer who, is farming with nature to educate as much as possible, and to engage with your customers as much as possible, because I think the more we empower people to have an understanding of where their food is coming from, the more that feeds back to the farmer and enables them to farm in the way of being less reliant on the big agribusinesses. And then the message starts to go back, and also encouraging as many people as possible just to ask those questions about where their food is coming from, whether it's in the butchers, whether it's in their local shops, in a cafe, in a restaurant. And I just feel that the more we encourage people to ask those questions, the more we educate our, the people who come to our farms and our communities at large. I think the more understanding there is, and then the more support there is for farmers to step back from those big agro businesses, because they're getting a bit more feedback and a bit more support from their community.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. That's great. A couple of questions I can probably tag onto that and put together, but there are many path dependencies which keep people locked into the current systems, e.g. supply chains, etc. How do we break these and reconfigure them? And then also within the same question, probably, how do we demonstrate that the claims that agroecology equals low yields and insufficient food supplies are false? Probably put those together. Do you want to, Vicky, go first?
Well, I'll start with the one you've just said, because I can remember that, about agroecology and low. We did talk about yields and, focusing more on margins. And then people say, well, we won't be able to feed the world. We're not feeding the world now. The problem of food access and being able to eat well, both here and globally, is entirely to do with access to food and incomes. And we waste, as I said, we waste between 30 and 40% of the food that is produced for all sorts of complex reasons, some of which could be really tackled. And that takes on the other question that you asked, because some of the specifications and demands that the supermarkets make, or the manufacturers and others, are actually totally unnecessary. And specifications such as cosmetic appearance, length, appearance of a carrot, size of a carrot, all those kind of things creates a huge amount of waste. And that waste is happening all over the world, where our specifications are making demands on farmers and growers, like green beans in Kenya. They waste a huge amount of those green beans because they have to be the certain size that we've been led to believe is important, which is incredible, really. We really don't need all our carrots to be the same length, or all our green beans to be the same length. All those kind of specifications need to change. So that'd be one thing I would definitely say that we should be demanding, and ideally the government would be demanding that. I can't remember the rest of the first question.
I think you've covered them both.
Have I covered it? Okay. Yeah, one way is specifications.
I'll just add into that. If we really look at the facts of what farmers are producing, the majority of farm landscape isn't feeding people. It's producing crops to feed animals, crops to go into anaerobic digesters, 1.5 million tonnes of wheat going to our bioethanol plants. We've got huge areas of going into solar panels and other stuff. 60% of our grain goes into livestock. We aren't really feeding people in the way we should do from our productive farm soils and the rest of our landscape. So that message that if we cut our yields, we won't feed a global population. There's lots of science out there. We have 2.5 times the landscape available to feed people than there are population. So we could cut our yield by half and still have plenty. But what we find is we have food sources in the wrong parts of the world and then shortages in others. And that global food system where we're taking resource from other places to add to livestock or to feed ourselves rather than the community in the area. That's the kind of the issues we need to tackle. And really to make farmers change and give them the confidence, it is that knowledge sharing, demonstrating on farm how these practices work, how you can reduce inputs, and helping farmers do it in a step-by-step stage rather than turn the tap off or next year I'm going to do it all in a different way. Because nature takes time and our soil takes time to adjust. And that's 3 to 5 years minimum to get that system built up, to rely on nature as a real underpinning of your business. And so that knowledge sharing has got to be key in delivering some of this change.
I just said that was spot on from Martin there about global food supplies and what we're feeding cars and livestock. Absolutely critical to get that right.
Right. How much lobbying is going on to support farmers financially who have already made the regen and nature-friendly farming journey? I.e., those that have been doing it for a long time, are they going to be penalised in the future by the financial schemes that hopefully will be coming?
Well, just lately, 4.5 years, many thousands of hours, sat in many DEFRA meetings and other things to push that message. Those farmers haven't got any biodiversity in the landscape, need to deliver it, and they need to be measured to reward or to help them put that back in the landscape. But those that have already got really good landscape and really good nature features within their landscape need reward now to enhance it further, but also to recognise they have delivered it in the past and to deliver it in the future. So it is really making sure that nature-friendly farmers and farming doesn't get disadvantaged by only offering incentives to put stuff back that was policy delivered or driven to take it away. So there is an awful lot of time, and I personally spend an awful lot of time in Westminster and in organised other groups to try and make sure our voice is being heard.
I can vouch for that. Martin does an amazing job. And there is a lot of lobbies on this, and organic farmers, for instance, they've not got what they expect yet, and if at all. So yeah, but there's a lot going on, but it's against a backdrop of incredible political upheaval. It's really hard. More support you can give to farmers, if you can, the better.
Yeah, well, so how do we manage meaningful landscape scale change and mindset change? And I would sort of expect that was sort of aimed at the mindset change at farmers. You know, how do we change farmers' mindset? Do you want to start, Lisa? Because you've already changed your mindset.
It's a really tricky one, that actually, because so much of there's a very strong culture in the farming community, and quite often it's generational, and so there's that baseline syndrome issue that we have going on about an acceptance of what's happened. And even though that's sort of getting worse and worse, it doesn't feel like that way necessarily within the farming community. And I think, what I have found to be the most successful way is just to not point fingers, not to blame, but just to share what you do. And I think on farm visits, I've had some local farmers come and visit, our farm. We're part of a farm cluster where we've tried to encourage all of our neighbours around us to incorporate a level of friendly farming techniques. and, you know, bringing them onto the farm and realizing that we've got a successful business, but actually there's a different system going on that is based on farming within one's environment rather than one's farm being a platform. And for other farmers to see that and to realize that you're still selling your produce, your inputs are low, you don't necessarily have growing costs and growing debt, you know, is really valuable for them. And I think it encourages them to just perhaps start to open up, you know, their field of vision, because it can feel very threatening, you know, if you've only farmed in the way that you farmed, to sort of try and think about doing it differently can be quite scary. So I think the more of us that are able to share what we do, even if it's not perfect, it doesn't need to be perfect, even if it's you know, it's work in progress, doesn't matter. I think showing that we're trying to be flexible, trying to do things different, is encouraging to other farmers. In, you know, it's a way of giving a bit of encouragement to that farming community and that culture. The more of us that show that we're prepared to do things a little bit differently, the more encouraging it is to others.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Society has, in the past, this is a big one to end on. We'll make this one the last question. Yeah, we've got 2 minutes left, so yeah, do your best. Society has, in the past, avoided paying the environmental cost of cheap food. How do we combat this? Does the answer lie with carbon or environmental tax relative to audited production? And I'll open that to everybody to have a crack at. But how do we encourage people to pay the true cost of food?
I'll kick it off there. If we really look at it, we have been paying, but not through the food we buy. So so a company is making a profit out of the food we buy, yet we pick the bill up for the damage it's caused in other areas through the water quality, biodiversity, air quality, health issues. So society is picking up the tab, but it's not paying for it through the produce. So we've got to really reconnect that food that's delivering positive outcomes for biodiversity and climate should be marketed and labelled for what it is. And that produce that's causing harm to our biodiversity, our landscape, and our society and communities should be marketed as for what it is. And there should be taxation or disincentives or something to make sure we change the system. Because our polluting costs, our food system has damaged and is damaging our planet and our ability to produce food in the future. And unless we do it fairly soon, and that means pretty rapid shifting for some systems and recognising the damage it causes, we will be in a hell of a mess more than we are now. So I'm all for labelling that really represents the way it's produced, but also trade tariffs, policy and other tariffs that blocks damaging systems.
Well, I would agree with what Martin just said. I think that's actually a really good response. But one thing I have noticed with the data that we've got, the farmers getting so little that if it was doubled or even quadrupled, it would make very little difference to the buyer and the processor. Well, it would make a difference to their bottom line, but it's so tiny that it could be doubled without any impact on the consumer. So suggesting consumers should be paying more right now is not politically very, it's not going to get anywhere. So I think it needs to be other measures, but really encouraging through dietary change, people to choose fresh produce and know the origin, look at the labels, choose wisely and stop eating so much junk. That has to be part of the transition to help them to get the right kind of produce for their own health, and actually supporting farmers more directly, because buying fresh, you should ideally be supporting more directly the money going to farmers, but also seeking alternative traders, you know, and like farmers markets. But we want them, they've really got to grow to be accessible to everybody. But I think taxation is a tricky one. Politically, it's very tricky. We did get the sugary drinks tax that took 12 years of campaigning by Sustain, and it's had a bit of an impact, but it just shows how fiscal measures are really hard to get through like that. But as Martin says, we're already paying in so much, that needs to be addressed through regulation as well.
I just quickly want to just pick up on something that's just come into the chat that I forgot to mention. We are paying it through our health bill through the NHS. In a few years' time, half of the budget is going of the NHS budget is going to be dealing with diabetes, just one ailment that our food system is causing. So we've got to really tackle it, and we've got to have the government to really step up and make that delivery of change happen, or else we are going to pay through it through other taxation and costs working with the NHS.
Thank you very much. I think we'll leave it there. We've just run over by 2 minutes, so we haven't done too bad. Thank you very much,